Hi guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about carrying your cross and how when we allow our suffering to be united with Christ, the weight of that cross that we are carrying becomes so much lighter. And I really first started to focus in on this, like allowing ourselves to carry our cross with Christ, when I was preparing for the second session in this Bible study that I'm writing. And I was trying to focus in on who are people from the Bible in the Old Testament and in the New Testament that carried their cross. And sometimes people that didn't want to carry their cross, because I did not want to carry the cross that I'm carrying right now. I would give anything to have Emilia here with us. And so sometimes your cross is forced upon you. You don't have the choice whether to carry it or not, but you have the choice on how you're going to carry it and how heavy you will allow that cross to be for yourself. And so that brought me to Simon of Cyrene. When Jesus is carrying his cross and he's struggling and he's suffering, and Simon is forced into that suffering. He is forced, he is pulled from the crowd, he is pulled from his comfort, and he is forced into this suffering with Jesus. And he has to unite in that suffering with Jesus. They're carrying that cross together. He doesn't have the option. He didn't want to do it. But because he carried that cross with Jesus, he was closer to Jesus than he would have ever been had he had stayed on the side comfortable. And that has brought me so much peace. To know that Jesus is with me even more in my suffering and in the struggle than he may have ever been in the easy days when everything seemed to be going right. Of course, Jesus is always with us, but I feel like in a different way, in a more real way, he holds us and he carries us in our suffering because he went first in that suffering so that we didn't have to do it alone. And something that I keep imagining when I think of Simon helping Jesus carry his cross is that Simon looked forward and saw Jesus carrying it with him. He looked forward and he saw this innocent man carrying the struggle for the greater salvation story. If you even flip back, my sister was telling me this story last night. They're reading The Life of Pi, and she was talking to me about the Garden of Gethsemane and how that's relative to that book. And it's really stuck with me that when Jesus was in the garden, he wasn't sitting there yes, salvation history, I'm about to save the world. No, he sat there. He sweat blood because he was so scared for the suffering that he was going to have to go through. And even though he was God, he cried and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it's easy to feel that way too in our suffering. Every day there is a moment where I ask God, how is this my real life and why? Not why, but why am I the one carrying it? Right? I know there's never going to be an answer. And I know that God's plan is good. But it doesn't make it easier. It's so hard to comprehend how one day I felt my baby kicking and the next day she was gone. When I went into labor like any normal person. It's very hard to comprehend that. And so I just keep reminding myself that not even the Savior of the world desired suffering. Right? So innately, none of us want it. Suffering is the last thing that we want. We don't like the heaviness. We don't like the darkness. But I love the idea that in that suffering, we are right there with Jesus, united in that. And so, how can we, while carrying our crosses, whether that's a heavy cross, like losing someone that you love, or whether it's a cross of what is my future going to look like? What's my next step? Or maybe it's a struggle in a relationship. God, how can we lift our eyes above our own suffering so that it can be used for good? Because just like Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me in the garden? He knew the result. And he allowed the suffering. He walked through that suffering, and he allowed it to be used for good so that we may have hope. And so the same goes for us. If we choose to sit in our suffering and focus so much on our own suffering that we can't see how it could be used for good, it won't be used for good. But when we look beyond our own suffering, we allow God to work in it. We allow him to use our suffering also for the salvation of the world, to bring our brothers and sisters to heaven, to get ourselves to heaven. And if there's one thing that I've realized in this time, it is that life is so fragile. It's so fragile. And this life is so short. And so how can you and I live today in our suffering, but also in our joys, in our happiness? How can we live our humanity so that we are walking to heaven and we're also walking those alongside us to heaven? That's what we're called to do. If you take one thing away from this video, it's that life is short and we're going to suffer, especially when we follow Jesus. We face tribulation, we face judgment. We're mocked. In this day and age, following Jesus is not the normal thing. And you may even see influencers talking about God, but then they don't live it, right? That's still not walking with God. That's still not following God. How can you tell people about Jesus, not only through your words, but through your actions and the way that you live in your suffering and the way that you live in the good moments? How can you live like Christ so much so that people look at you and they say, I want what they have? And then they figure it out for themselves also. That's what we're called to do as Christians. So my prayer for me and my prayer for you this week is that we have the courage to look beyond our own suffering and allow God to use it for good, because when he can use it for good, it lifts the weight from us a little bit. Just a little bit. The suffering becomes a little bit lighter when it's used for good.